Hello guys, and welcome back to Tuesdays with Philly. So today's episode is going to be really in-depth. I'm going to share a lot about my top 5 revelations that I've had throughout my course of, my journey meditating. And it's been 6, 7, I keep losing track of how many years it's been. It's been 7 years of me meditating. I'm going to kind of share and speak on some of the key revelations that have come to me through my practice. And it's so funny, I feel like the longer that you engage in a practice like meditation, the more you learn over time. So it's been quite a beautiful journey of growth and expansion. So I'd really like to speak on that. I'm a little bit unregulated because I am filming this on a Saturday, and usually I film my podcast on a Sunday after I do like a pretty intensive breathwork practice that's guided. But today, due to just kind of wanting to do a little bit more with the podcast and my schedule, I'm filming it on a Saturday. So I'm sorry if I'm a little bit off in the way I'm articulating or just my energy. I find it so much harder to regulate myself when I haven't done like a good breathwork practice. And I feel like when you go back and watch my like earlier podcasts, like you can see my ADD energy and my like discombobulatory state of being is very present in some of those episodes. They just don't get to the point as fast. So please be patient with me today if that happens. But to help alleviate that or prevent that, let's just do a check-in and let's come to a state of presence. Wherever you are, just slowing down, taking a deep breath in through the nose. Little sip at the top and exhale. Just do 2 more rounds of that. Okay, amazing. Really needed that. I can already feel calmer. All right, I absolutely love being able to check in with you guys like that. I hope you're feeling very regulated and very present to dive into this episode. Now, jumping into the lesson of the week, I went and saw Gabor Mate on Thursday night, and it was just amazing. He's an absolutely brilliant human being, and I went and saw him live. And the lesson of the week is actually something that I learned in that lecture or talk that he gave, which I thought was really fascinating, and then it just kind of transported me back to the times that I've worked in a homeless refuge with people that struggle with addiction, and it's kind of a nice lesson to piggyback off of the last few episodes that I've done. But it was just really fascinating what he shared in terms of, he was talking about how addiction isn't a choice, which is so true, but he was really touching on some of the neurobiological processes and bases for that claim. And something that I just thought was so fascinating that he brought up, I wrote it down in my notes, which is why I'm looking down, but he said basically, there are a few prime examples of the ways in which our neurodevelopment from childhood is really impacted and can be, shaped or biased towards addictive tendencies, in particular to certain substances. And what I thought was really fascinating about it is he brought up a few examples, one being, opioids, which are, within humans, we have natural opioid receptors in the brain. They can come, there are kind of receptors that mimic opioids, which is a substance that essentially alleviates pain, can bring relief, and a sense of calm and love. Include things like oxytocin, endorphins, just a lot of really feel-good chemicals that can just alleviate pain and provide not only physical relief from that, but emotional relief. He said that these receptors are found obviously in the areas of the brain that are responsible for regulating pain sensitivity, like physical pain sensitivity, but they're also in the areas of the brain that are responsible for emotional pain and psychological pain that humans endure. Now, when these receptors are not activated in childhood, individuals can gravitate towards substances that do activate these receptors or do attach onto the receptors in the brain. And he was talking about how a lot of these substances include things like heroin, fentanyl, these opioid-like substances that people can get so tragically addicted to. And that oftentimes individuals that have had that real lack of love and affection in childhood, a lot of the times they will gravitate towards these kind of sedative, substances that do latch onto those receptors in the brain. Can include also things like alcohol, as a way to not only numb pain, but you know, there have been many people that have shared that when they do heroin, it's like getting like a warm hug. So it's not uncommon for those kinds of individuals to have experienced emotional neglect or isolation, or a real lack of a sense of love and affection from caregivers, which I thought was really fascinating. And then he kind of looked at another substance, which is like substances, I guess, class of substances that people might become addicted to, which are like stimulants. And that obviously part of that drive towards using stimulants is not only the activation of things like norepinephrine and all of these substrates that really amp up our nervous system and give us energy, but also in that amping up and that activation of our sympathetic nervous system, it activates a sense of drive and a sense of motivation, right? And a sense of striving towards something. So if you're someone who maybe leans more towards that class of drugs, like there's this whole concept, I guess, around drug of choice. Pardon, I guess, the term of choice there, but it is an interesting thing to kind of inquire about. I know that Peter Attia discussed this recently on his podcast with the author of Dopamine Nation and Anna Lemke. So she was on a podcast with Peter Attia, I will put it here, and you know, he was talking about like what determines someone's drug of choice, or what determines why for some people they gravitate so heavily towards opiates but they never seem to have a problem with stimulants, or they or you have someone like me, for example, never ever had any issues with alcohol or anything that could like sedate me. I'd never get hooked on that, but why is it that I could get hooked on like speed and all of these kinds of stimulant substances? And basically what Gabor said when he was talking about the stimulant sides of things is that, yeah, you've got this, they activate this drive and this sense of attention, high energy and motivation towards goals, right? And so the substances could be things like food, speed, gambling, things that give you a sense of reward. And so what's fascinating about this is that oftentimes children in their childhood, let's say if they had ADHD, so they really struggled with that attentiveness, or they maybe lacked a sense of predictability in terms of receiving rewards consistently for their behavior, or just attention, right? Then they might gravitate towards stimulants because it gives them that sense of dopamine. You know, universally as humans, what we require for healthy development is love, connection, affection, and attention. And Gabor touched on this specifically, you know, like just attention for just being, you know, attention and recognition. So if you're someone as a child where maybe you grew up in an environment where your parents were always working and you never got that consistent attention that was predictable just for you being you, and let's say instead you only got attention when you achieved something, or, you know, your parents couldn't make time for you in their day unless it was because, like, unless you were actually doing something to get that attention. You weren't ever granted attention just for being perfectly you as you are. And that is like the foundation of healthy attachment and healthy attachment relationships. And secure attachment with parents is that mutual recognition, joint attention, joint time spent together, just being curious, doing play. But yeah, if you grow up in an environment where that's not the case, you might find yourself leaning towards, not only can that kind of underlie some ADD and ADHD symptoms because you can almost get a little bit restless from that lack of attention, or you can lose that ability to focus because there's no need to, right? If no one's speaking with you and you have no stimulus in your environment, those areas of your brain aren't going to develop to give you that executive function and attention, so that can lead to ADHD, which then again can cascade into maybe leaning on stimulants to focus later in life, which can then, you know, go from speed to ice, or just this whole developmental cascade of things that can lead to our addictive behaviors. And so I just thought that was really fascinating. I know it's a bit of a nuanced lesson of the week. I guess the overarching lesson is that our developmental environments can really dictate and shape our behaviors and preferences as adults towards certain substances, and fixed action patterns. So it's just interesting to think about and reflect on. So besides that, it was an incredible talk. He was really amazing and just presented so brilliantly given his age, and he's a very special human being. Okay, so moving on to the meat of today. to the revelations I've had while meditating. So there's 5 that I'll go through. So the first revelation that I had was really a profound sense of gratitude for the transitory nature of life, and really a profound sense of gratitude for everything in my life. And I think I realized this quite early on in my meditation journey. And I think it's also because I started meditating after a pretty toxic relationship ended. And that was a long-term relationship. So being able to break free of the toxicity and the darkness that it entrenched me in was very liberating. And, unlike any other feeling I'd had in a long time, being free from the chaos and pain of a really difficult and tumultuous relationship. And I think after you've been through that for such a long time and you feel so shackled in a way, once you are free, the simplest of things can bring you joy. So really finding time to cultivate a sense of peace and quiet and stillness with my breath. When I started doing meditation, I just realized how profoundly simple that experience is, just sitting in stillness, but also how profoundly peaceful it was after so many years of pain and chaos and unpredictability and instability. So, and that's something that I just realized is that this is all I need. It was so peaceful just to be able to sit for 20 minutes without having to worry or think about pain. As well, it really made me, that time in stillness increased a lot of self-awareness. Not only interoception, but exteroception as well. So awareness of my environment, awareness of all of the things that I had access to, all of the support I had access to free myself from that relationship and that period of my life and that season of my life that was so difficult. Being able to sit in stillness allowed me to become aware of all the external support I had and all the freedom I had ahead of me, and the real sense of freedom I had in being free of that relationship. And this was also at a time where I was entering into my sobriety journey. So I was needing to make amends and apologize to people. And I think just being able to meditate on that and meditate during that period, it just allowed everything, every interaction, every apology to feel so much more potent and to really sink in, and to really just appreciate all the people that accepted my apologies and all of the connections that I was able to reestablish and form again, that I could see was so much healthier than what I had been allowing myself to let in. All of those new connections were so much more healthy and so much more nourishing than what I had been experiencing in the years prior. And it just really allowed those connections to set in, being able to meditate during that time. Now I am just going to play to kind of summarize that revelation. This moment from Sam Harris's Waking Up app. I will put a little photo here, but I'm just going to play it, and I hope that what he speaks on resonates and lands with you.
About gratitude. There's now a lot of research that suggests that gratitude is good for us. No surprise there. And as an emotion, it is very easy to invoke. Unless you are living the worst possible life, it should be easy to find something for which you're grateful. And it can be very skillful and wise to do this. Now, one reflection I find myself doing when I'm in some ordinary, contracted state of mind, let's say I'm stressed out by something not going well, I'm reacting to some hassle, I could be caught in traffic and late for an appointment. I sometimes think of bad things that haven't happened to me. I might think that I haven't been diagnosed with a fatal illness. I'm not caught in a war zone. And I think of all the people on Earth in that moment who are suffering those sorts of dislocations in their lives. And then I reflect that if I were in their shoes, I would be desperate to get back to precisely the situation I'm now in. Just stuck in traffic and late for an appointment, but without any real care in the world. I noticed this at dinner the other night with my family. Everyone seemed to be in a fairly mediocre frame of mind. We were all in some way disgruntled or stressed out. I had a million things I was thinking about. And I suddenly noticed how little joy we were all taking in one another's company. And then I thought, if I had died yesterday and could have the opportunity to be back with my family, I thought of how much I would savor this moment right now. And it totally transformed my mood. It gave me instantaneous access to my best self and to a feeling of pure gratitude for the people in my life. Just think of what it would be like to lose everything and then be restored to the moment you're now in, however ordinary. You can reboot your mind in this way, and it need not take any time. The truth is, you know exactly what it's like to feel overwhelming gratitude for your life. And if you have the freedom and the free attention to listen to this lesson right now, you are in an unusual situation. There are at least 1 billion people on Earth at this moment who would consider their prayers answered if they could trade places with you. There are at least 1 billion people who are suffering debilitating pain, or political oppression, or the acute stages of bereavement. To have your health, even just sort of, to have friends, even only a few, to have hobbies or interests and the freedom to pursue them, to have spent this day free from some terrifying encounter with chaos is to be lucky. Just look around you and take a moment to feel how lucky you are. You get another day to live on this earth. Enjoy it.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? So, that was just one little moment that Sam shares through his app. But I obviously had that realization before I started using the app, but he really does articulate it so beautifully. The second revelation that I had, also with a little bit of help from Sammy Boy, Sam Harris, is that free will does not exist. Now, this stemmed from really using Sam's app. The way that he trains the users in meditation is really powerful. And it's not just simply sitting in silence. He asks a lot of cognitive Socratic questions sometimes throughout the meditations that really bring to the fore the reality of consciousness, which will lead into the third revelation that I had. But essentially, I realized that free will doesn't exist. And this came from contemplating on what a thought really is. How can I seemingly generate and overlay memories when I have my eyes closed? How can I do that? And what is projecting that from my consciousness? Just like dreaming, what dictates and generates our dreams and their contents, So when you are like daydreaming, or when someone asks you to close your eyes, like I'll do it right now, like, okay, I want you to close your eyes and think of someone in your life, someone very special to you. Visualize them. Now I want you to visualize someone else. And someone else. And now visualize someone else. How is that happening in your brain? Okay, you can open your eyes now. How is that happening? And I think just like we can do that while we are awake and kind of ponder on, do I have this sense of doing that myself? You can translate that into when you're sleeping. Like, how are these visuals being generated in your sleep when you're dreaming or having a nightmare? So meditation really allows one to unlock the undercurrent of consciousness as it is free-flowing in every moment. Except throughout our days, this free-flowing undercurrent is not always accessible due to the noise of our minds and our environments. So we can lose touch, and then we end up acting in ways that are unconscious or not authentic or not wholesome. We lose touch with that as we are going about our days. So I think that this was a really big revelation for me, because I came to realize that we may not have free will over the course of our lives, but we do have consciousness. We can be conscious of our lives and what happens within us and around us, and that is a beautiful place to be. It's hard to maintain this 24/7, as we can become overwhelmed by the voices in our heads and the distractions of our environment. But you can, when you consistently make time to meditate and to find stillness, day in and day out, you establish a greater sense of presence. And this ability to access the undercurrent of consciousness, for which we have really no control over. It's just really this spontaneous phenomena that takes place within us and around us. You can become more grounded in that sense of connection to your own consciousness. And that's what's so important, is cultivating that connection and presence with consciousness. As we are often going about our days, we lose that connection and we essentially kind of go on autopilot. And the reason why that reveals that free will doesn't exist is every action, every choice we make is determined by pre-existent sequences of events and stimuli within our environment, and interoceptively as well. How you act today is a result of so many things. I would highly recommend looking into Robert Sapolsky's work on this as well. He really provides a lot of beautiful insight into it, and he's also, I think, done a podcast with Sam Harris, which is pretty brilliant. But essentially, like, down to the moment of, you know, pre-birth, you know, even our mother's diet determined the extent to which our genes developed, right? And what genes were switched on and off. And then that obviously has impacts on the decisions we make today, or the sensitivity of our bodies to our environments and different environments. Our boy was even talking about in his talk how rates of asthma are higher in children that, one, grew up in inner cities or urban environments, and also two, when their parents are highly stressed or highly strung. And I think that's just really fascinating. No one comes into the world choosing to have asthma, and we wouldn't assign free will to something like that. So why do we assign free will to other things, you know, aka like the pitfalls of the 12-step program? Why assign addiction to a lack of, you know, of moral free will, when we wouldn't do that to any other disease, or genetic predisposition or genetic mutation, right? And we've got no free will over it, but we do have the capacity and the ability to cultivate presence around it, and to cultivate presence and connection to our own consciousness and the consciousness surrounding us. So that one was a bit complicated, but that was just this really beautiful revelation I had, is, you know, when you're sitting in stillness, it's so fascinating to try and communicate this, but when you're sitting in stillness and you reach the point, it's quite beautiful, and you reach the point of emptying your thoughts, just empty, just emptying your thoughts. And you come to this place of no mind and just stillness. I have no way of predicting what my next thought is going to be, you know, and that's a weird point. That's a weird liminal space that you reach when you start meditating, is like you get to this place of absolute quiet and peace. And then you're like you eventually have a thought, but you're like, holy fuck, I don't know what's going to arise. Like, there have been times when I'm like in stillness and I've reached a point of, I guess, no mind, but then all of a sudden I hear like a bird chirp outside, or I hear a bang on the floor above me, and that captures my attention, you know, but I didn't know that was going to arise. I couldn't predict that a bird outside my window was about to chirp. It just did, you know? And so you also become really hyper, I'm going to talk about this a bit later, but you become really hyper aware and hypersensitive to stimulus in your environment, and it makes living so much more enriching. You know, so like you begin to hear sounds, and you begin to hear things that you just wouldn't notice in your day-to-day when you're on autopilot. So there are times when I'm meditating, and when I am, you know, really cultivating that sense of stillness, I could hear a pin drop. Like I can hear everything in my environment. I can hear the brown noise in my building, like this undercurrent of buzzing. Don't know where it comes from. It's probably some kind of generator, but I can't hear it right now when I'm doing this podcast, because I'm kind of on autopilot. My sympathetic nervous system's activated. But when I get into a parasympathetic meditative state, that brown noise comes back into my awareness. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean it's not there right now. But our brains are so fascinating. It's just not in my sensory plane. My brain's like, no, I'm doing a podcast right now. I need to focus on this stimulus, the recording light. It doesn't have time or capacity. This gets back to capacity theory around cognitive psychology, but it doesn't have capacity in a way to detect that brown noise. I start to hear that when I'm meditating. I start to hear cars, like at 5 a.m. in the morning on the motorway. I can hear them like from where I'm sitting in stillness in my apartment. And it's just, I can't hear that right now talking to you. But if I were to sit in stillness, all of these sensory processes that are constantly going on in our environment come to the fore, and it's just such a beautiful phenomena to experience in that silence. Moving on to number 3. The third revelation that I had while meditating is that there is no self, only consciousness. And I've kind of touched on this, but this is a nice little, they kind of weave into each other, number 2 and 3. But consciousness is emergent. Everything is emergent. We have no way of anticipating anything that captures our attention or may not arise or unfold in any given moment. And we are almost asleep when we're awake. And meditation is this process of awakening to consciousness and really becoming aware of everything that's constantly transpiring around us. You know, the audible sounds that I've touched on, bodily sensations, changes in lighting and our perception, these all become so potent when we take the time to quieten our mind. Let's fast forward now to revelation number 4, which is that was a pretty big one for me that I kind of came to learn very early on, probably within the first 2 years of my practice. And, you know, oftentimes when discussing the pros and the cons of meditation, one of the, I guess, cons is that some of the revelations can be quite destabilizing for some individuals, to the point where truths arise and it can be very unsettling or very uncomfortable for some people to sit with that truth or revelation that comes to the fore. And this one was pretty big for me. It is that attachment is the root of all suffering. And I had this revelation, as I said, pretty early on, and it was very difficult for me to grapple with initially, because it made me extremely self-aware of my ongoing addictive tendencies and the way that I was and felt trapped within my addictive behaviors and rituals around food and eating. I remember every morning and every evening I would meditate and I would pray for freedom, and I would pray for freedom to be released from my addiction and to be able to let go of it. Deep down, I felt as if there was no escape, because I really was animalistic in the way that I was impulsively engaging in these behaviors, where I didn't have any control. And I would pray and I would pray and I would pray to have the strength to not impulsively engage in these behaviors, and I couldn't. And I realized that this attachment to this fixed action pattern, or this fixed action pattern that I was stuck in, was causing me so much suffering. Deep down, I felt that there was no escape during this time, which was really hard for me. And it made my suffering very present. So I think that's one of the things that people need to be aware of when they venture in on this, when they start meditating consistently as a part of their daily practice, is things can come up that are quite like rattling. And, during this time, I have spoken about that I was meditating, but I also was meditating all the way up until I was actually hospitalized for my trauma and the consequences of this addictive cycling around my patterns of behavior with food. And there's this quote from one of my favorite books called Tuesdays with Maury. And it's actually what this podcast is named after, Tuesdays with Philly. But Tuesdays with Maury is a fantastic book. I started reading it while I was in hospital, and one of the quotes in the book is that once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. And this could not be more true. For many years, I felt eerily close to death, like I was slowly dying and slowly killing myself. And I knew that this was, I know this is true now when I look back in retrospect at, what I was doing. Starving myself for 22 hours a day, only eating once a day for 2 years straight, doing that. Over those 2 years, I was slowly dying and I was slowly coming closer and closer to death. My insides were degrading, my organs were failing, but it was a very slow process, cloaked in this veil of health and leading a healthy lifestyle. So when I look back now, I can see that I was slowly killing myself. But what's scary to share is that the closer that you get to death, at least for me, the closer you also get to the edge of life and wanting to live fully. So for me, during this time of my life when I was starving myself and slowly killing myself, I felt, for some reason, incredibly alive at the same time as I was dying. And the way that I can kind of depict this is I've got a photo that I'm going to show of when I was in New Zealand, about a year before I was hospitalized. And this was when I was also, definitely in the thick of my behaviors and starving myself and only eating one meal a day. And in this photo, it's so interesting because I just remembered this trip very vividly. And that's the thing, the closer you get to death, or the closer you are to dying, the more vivid life becomes before you finally reach that precipice of everything ending. And during this trip, it just, the best way I can describe it is that you just feel all of life so much more heavily. I felt like as if I could feel every photon of sunshine on my skin, every particle of fresh air in the breeze, every human smile and every interaction slows down and becomes absolutely quintessentially sacred. My senses during this time I felt were hyper strung, and I remember just feeling so incredibly connected to the earth and nature and my surroundings. Everything was so hyper sensitive, and I felt everything. And I felt everything very deeply during this time. And, I get that some people fast for spiritual reasons, and many talk about this feeling of peace and connectedness that they might start to feel from fasting and starving themselves. As I was doing this, I wasn't fasting for days at a time. I was fasting for 22 hours and only eating one meal a day. But because I had been doing that for about a year at this stage, I was very close, I feel, to this state of death. Like, I knew I was dying in a way, like thinking back on it now. And when you are in that state or season of your life, everything just is heavy and everything feels sacred. It's really weird. And it's really kind of difficult for me to talk about, and I'm getting out of breath. But now that I'm healthier and obviously literally eat like every 2 hours, it's harder for me to access that level of sacredness. But in a way, that's a good thing, because I'm so much more alive in a much more positive way. Because during this time as well, although I felt everything, I felt everything so deeply. So not only did I feel deeply connected to nature, but I felt deeply connected to so much pain that I had endured, and any kind of painful event or thing that happened around me was very hard for me to handle. And I would just feel the weight of it, which would then make my habits worse in terms of the starving, because to numb the load of the pain, I would rather have no energy to feel than feel. I'd rather starve myself and have no energy to feel the pain of living than to eat and have the energy to feel the pain of living. And I don't mean to go on a tangent here in talking about this revelation, but I think during this time I just realized that attachment is the root of all suffering. And so attachment to things, attachment to fixed action patterns, to ways of being, because I knew that my addiction was a way of being for me that I was attached to, that I couldn't latch off of, and it was causing me so much deep suffering. But just like attachment to ways of being can be the root of suffering, unfortunately, suffering is a part of life, and attachment to living things, attachment to people, attachment to possessions, is all, attachment to a sense of self or self-image is all the root of suffering. Like, it will eventuate into suffering. It's getting a bit heavy, but even your loved ones in your life and your family that you are deeply attached to and love, those attachments will eventually disappear. People die. Not everything is permanent. So you see the suffering that can arise from that. Now, this isn't to say that just move through your life like a completely detached being and not make any friends or have any meaningful relationships or connections. No, it's quite the opposite. You have to forge those connections, because that's where joy comes from. Joy and happiness can be cultivated through attachments to people and relationships, but also just having an appreciation for nature and attachments to the earth as it presents itself. But you also need to simultaneously live in duality and realize that all of that is temporary. And so you need to be present as much as you can and appreciate those moments and time spent with loved ones and in spaces of beauty, because it's not going to be there forever. You're not always going to be able to walk down to the beach. You are going to get old. You're going to be confined to a bed one day and unable to move unassisted. And moving through life with that awareness makes every moment so much more precious. And it also allows you to grant freedom to those in your life and grant freedom to yourself, and to really cultivate a deep appreciation for that freedom and prioritizing that freedom, freedom of movement, freedom to love, freedom to act, recognizing that, we only have one life. Sorry, I'm just ranting today. But yes, that was the fourth revelation, is that attachment is the root of all suffering. So I realized that, there's healthy and unhealthy attachments, and I needed to really rid myself of the unhealthy attachment to my way of being. And since then, I can translate this attitude to letting go of attachments to negative beliefs about myself, and negative beliefs about others. When we let go of those attachments, we can be free of suffering. So the final revelation is that we can alter our physiological state of being through visualization and the breath. So this was a more recent revelation that I had while I was feeling quite keyed up one afternoon. I sat in meditation and visualized one of my favorite beaches I've spent time on during my short life here. And I also visualized the night sky and seemingly felt the cool breeze on my skin. Like I felt like I was generating all of these sensory processes while I was meditating, and I really just needed to quieten my mind. And I just got this overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. Knowing that for as long as I'm alive, I'll most likely always have access to these spaces. Wherever I am in the world, my favorite beach will always be there for me to come back to. Wherever I am in the world, I know that I can find a space to look up at the night sky and just be in awe of the stars and the galaxy and the Milky Way. And that just put me this overwhelming sense of peace. And I was visualizing these scenes, and it was just so incredibly powerful and a really beautiful way that I found to calm my nervous system and find a sense of clarity and gratitude. And yeah, in the grand scheme of things, everything will eventually dissolve into nothingness. But for now, for the time being, I can be cradled by the safety of the semi-permanence of the ocean and the sky and the earth for my brief time here while I'm alive, I know in a billion years it's all going to be gone. The sun will have swallowed us. But hopefully for the duration that I'm alive, I'll be able to have access to the sky and the beaches and nature and find connection and peace through those places. And that's just so beautiful. And this gets back to this another amazing truth that is so integral, is that it really is attachment to material possessions that are the most toxic and can be the most causal of suffering, attachment to material things, as opposed to attachment to a particular area of safety for you in nature, right? That's so very much probably harmless, as opposed to something like being attached to a car or money can go in a blink of an eye, or an idea of who we are as a person, appearance-wise. That degrades, That was the last and final revelation, is that we can alter our physiological state of being through visualization while meditating and the breath. And again, it's really through the meditating itself that you can have these realizations, that you can find the mental space and time and peace to visualize these scenes and to contemplate on the beauty of nature and life. I know this was a little bit of a heavy episode with a lot of lessons kind of interwoven. But yes, so going over again the 5 revelations that I had. The first is that I had cultivated this deep gratitude for the temporality of life and how temporary everything is. The second revelation I had is that free will does not exist. The third revelation I had is that there is no self, only consciousness. The fourth revelation is that attachment is the root of all suffering. And the fifth is that we can alter our physiological state of being through visualization and the breath. I'd just like to thank you all so much if you did tune into this episode. And thank you for being patient with my rambling and less regulated nervous system. But I very much look forward to part 2 of this episode, and I hope you tune into that one as well. All right, I love you all so much. Bye.